The result of love is not always a beautiful fairy tale wedding. Not necessarily, but that is my choice. But he did not think so, and it was all just an excuse for a lie. After all this time, now I understand him clearly, and we lost each other. 5 years. That's how long I had been with Alex. We'd met at a mutual friend's housewarming party and hit it off almost instantly. We bonded over our shared dislike for IPAs and our love for Nanese cartoons. Everything about us just felt right. From dating for a year to moving in together, everything fell into place. After 2 years, we adopted a cat, Beans. A year later, we got engaged. Alex had always been a bit quieter when it came to emotions, but I didn't think much of it. Our proposal wasn't extravagant, just a simple Saturday morning hike to our favorite lookout spot. He nervously pulled the ring box from his pocket, and I said yes without a second thought. The proposal wasn't a huge production, but I loved it. We set the wedding date for October of the following year, and for the most part, everything felt like it was going according to plan. But in the last few months, things have changed. Slowly, Alex started making comments that didn't sit right with me. We'd be discussing venues, and he'd mention, "That's a lot of money for just one day," or "Do we really need all those people?" At first, I brushed it off as typical guy stuff. Maybe it was just the pressure of planning a wedding, or maybe he was stressed about our budget. He had been working extra hours at the construction company to take on bigger projects. I understood. But then came the delayed responses. I'd send him options for caterers or photographer ideas, and hours later, he'd reply with just a "looks fine" or "whatever you want." When I'd ask if everything was okay, he'd give me some excuse about being busy at work, and I'd let it slide. But things started getting worse. Alex began going out more, meeting his work friend, Sam, for drinks after work. Again, nothing unusual at first. He'd come home later than usual, more distracted, constantly checking his phone, and showing less affection. I didn't want to make a fuss. Maybe it was just pre-wedding jitters. Maybe he was exhausted from the extra work he was taking on. But something felt off, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. I tried to talk to my best friend, Jessica, about it. She suggested a date night to reconnect. I thought it was a good idea, so I made reservations at this cozy new Italian restaurant downtown. I put on my favorite dress, not too fancy, but something I hadn't worn in a while, and even picked up a six-pack of Alex's favorite beer to have waiting for us at home. I thought this could be the night we'd have a serious talk, reconnect, and finally get on the same page. Unfortunately, our date night was a disaster. Alex seemed distracted throughout dinner, barely engaging in the conversation. When I brought up our honeymoon plans, he dropped a bomb on me. He told me he wasn't sure if he was ready for all of this, not just the honeymoon, but the wedding, marriage, the whole thing. I was stunned. We'd been together for 5 years, engaged for 8 months, and now, all of a sudden, he wasn't sure. When I pressed him for an explanation, he mentioned how he'd been talking to Sam about how marriage changes things, and how Sam's brother had gone through a messy divorce. He seemed to really be reflecting on this, and I tried to remain calm, but inside, my world felt like it was collapsing. I thought maybe I'd misunderstood, maybe it was just pre-wedding jitters, but this wasn't something I could just sweep under the rug. The rest of the evening was a blur. We barely touched our entrees, and the ride home was filled with thick, painful silence. At home, he deflected the conversation, saying he needed time to think. He ended up sleeping on the couch that night. I didn't sleep much either. I was too emotionally drained to even know what to do next. The next morning was no better. It was awkward, almost like we were strangers sharing a space. He mentioned meeting Sam and some work friends for lunch to watch the game. I didn't feel like arguing, so I let him go. I needed space too. I called Jessica, and she convinced me to get out of the apartment and clear my head. We went for coffee, and I told her everything. She listened, offering support and suggesting that maybe Alex was just feeling anxious. She recommended we go to Target for some retail therapy, and even though I didn't need anything, I ended up buying a bunch of random stuff, including a new shampoo and some throw pillows. By the time we left Target, I felt a little better, a little calmer, and was ready to head home. But as I pulled into the parking lot, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Kyler, one of Alex's co-workers I'd met at a company party. I opened it, and my stomach dropped. "Are you okay? Things got weird at the Rusty Nail last night." I called him immediately, feeling my heart pound in my chest. He sounded awkward at first, hesitant to say too much. But after some pushing, he told me what had happened. Apparently, Alex had been drinking with the guys, and when Sam asked if he was ready to be tied down, Alex had mentioned that if I were prettier, he'd be more excited to marry me. Kyler and some of the other guys had called him out for the comment, but Alex had laughed it off, saying they couldn't take a joke. I sat in my car for a good 20 minutes, just crying. I couldn't believe it. The man I thought I loved had publicly humiliated me like that in front of his friends, and then laughed it off. I didn't know how to process it. When I went inside, Alex was passed out on the couch, still in his clothes from the night before, and the apartment smelled like stale beer. I grabbed our cat, Beans, and locked myself in the bedroom. I needed time to think. Sunday morning came with the smell of coffee and bacon, Alex's standard. "I'm sorry, breakfast." He was hungover, but clearly trying to make amends. I couldn't be placated with food. I needed answer. When I confronted him about what Kyler had told me, he immediately tried to downplay the whole thing. He said he was drunk, trying to be funny, and that it wasn't a big deal. But the more he spoke, the more my anger rose. His excuse for what happened was that he had been trying to shut his friends up. He tried to explain how stressed he was about work and wedding costs, but none of that mattered anymore. What mattered was that he had used my appearance as the punchline to a joke. I couldn't stay there with him. I packed a bag, grabbed my keys, and went straight to Jessica's. I needed space, time away to figure things out. I couldn't stay in the apartment with him pretending everything was fine. When I told my brother, Ben, what happened, he was furious. He wanted to confront Alex right away, but I managed to calm him down. I wasn't ready for any confrontation yet. I just needed time to think. Throughout Sunday, Alex sent multiple texts apologizing. Each one was the same. "I love you. I'm sorry," but not once did he mention Maria. I hadn't even told him I knew about her yet, but the moment I found out, I knew everything was about to change. The next few days felt like a blur. I spent most of Sunday at Jessica's place, curled up on her couch with Beans by my side. We didn't talk much, but she was there, and that was all I needed. I kept thinking about everything: Alex's doubts, his distance, the cruel joke at the bar. I wanted to believe that maybe I was overreacting, that maybe it wasn't as bad as it seemed. But every time I replayed the conversation in my head, it felt worse. By Monday morning, I was still in a fog. I tried to go through the motions answering emails at work, meeting patients, pretending everything was fine, but I wasn't fine. And I knew deep down, neither was Alex. The quiet tension in our texts, the awkward silences when we spoke on the phone, it all pointed to the fact that something fundamental had shifted between us, and it wasn't just about wedding planning. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Kyler, the co-worker who'd clued me in about Alex's comment at the Rusty Nail. I hadn't responded to his last message about things getting weird, but I could feel the anxiety building as I read his new text. He said he had some more to share, and I didn't hesitate to call him. I had to know what was really going on. When he picked up, he sounded uneasy. "Hey," he said, clearly unsure of how much to say. I pressed him gently, asking if he could fill in the gaps, and eventually, he did. Kyler told me that Alex had been talking to Sam a lot, especially about his worries regarding our relationship. Apparently, Alex had mentioned to Sam that he was unsure about marrying me. Nothing physical had happened between him and Maria, but he had confided in Kyler about how emotionally connected he'd become to her. I felt like my breath had been knocked out of me. I couldn't comprehend what I was hearing. Maria? The new project coordinator at his company? I remembered meeting her briefly at the Christmas party a few months ago. She was nice, but we hadn't really talked much. I never imagined she'd be the reason Alex was questioning everything, Kyler went on, explaining that Sam had been encouraging Alex to explore his options before committing to a marriage. It didn't make sense. He had never once mentioned this to me, never once expressed these concerns about our relationship. All this time, I thought the distance between us was due to wedding stress, to his work projects piling up. But this was something else entirely. I hung up the phone, my mind spinning. I was furious, hurt, and confused all at once. I didn't know what to do with this new information. I thought I knew Alex. Our 5 years together had felt solid, built on mutual respect, laughter, and love. But now, I wasn't sure who I was dealing with. I called Ben, my older brother, to tell him everything. He didn't hold back. He can't just string you along like this. You deserve better. Ben wanted to confront Alex right away, but I knew I wasn't ready for that. I didn't even know what I was going to say to Alex yet. I needed space, time to process everything, to figure out what I wanted. The day dragged on. By the time I got home from work, Alex's truck was in the parking lot. My stomach churned. I didn't want to face him, but I knew I had to. I still hadn't decided if I was going to stay or leave, but I needed answers. When I walked into the apartment, Alex was sitting on the couch, his head in his hands. He looked worn out, like he hadn't slept in days. The atmosphere was suffocating, thick with unspoken tension. He jumped up when he saw me and said he wanted to talk. I stood by the door, refusing to sit next to him. The first words out of my mouth were simple but pointed. I know about Maria. His face went pale, and I could see the panic flicker in his eyes. He tried to brush it off, telling me I was mistaken, that it wasn't what it seemed. But I wasn't buying it. I didn't need him to explain further. I already knew everything I needed to know. Alex admitted that he'd developed feelings for Maria, but he swore that nothing physical had happened between them. Still, the fact that he'd been confiding in his friends about her, about his doubts about our marriage, felt like a betrayal. He went on to tell me that he feared turning into his father someone who couldn't commit, someone who walked away from everything. The same father who left when Alex was a kid, who'd cheated and abandoned their family. I tried to stay calm, but I could feel my chest tightening with each word he spoke. He told me that he was scared, that he wasn't sure if he could promise forever to anyone, because of what he'd witnessed in his childhood. My heart broke for him, maybe once, but not now. I wasn't his therapist. I wasn't the person who should have to bear the weight of his childhood trauma. When I asked him why he hadn't shared these doubts with me sooner, he hesitated. His answer came slowly. I didn't want you to think I didn't love you enough. But in hiding his feelings from me, he had created exactly what he feared: doubt, distance, and a growing chasm between us. I had been so wrapped up in our wedding plans, in making everything perfect, that I ignored the warning signs. His disinterest in the details, his increased time with Sam, his emotional distance, they were all red flags. I had been too afraid to confront. Instead, I dismissed them, telling myself it was just stress. But now, looking at him, I realized I was the one who had been fooling myself. Alex apologized again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was too little, too late. He admitted that the joke he made about my appearance wasn't about me. It was about him trying to look cool in front of his friends. But I couldn't get past the fact that he had used my body as a punchline in front of people he claimed to care about. He pleaded with me to try therapy, to work through things together, but I wasn't ready for that. I told him I needed space, that I needed time to think. I grabbed my things, prepared to leave. As I walked out the door, I heard him say, "I love you," but I didn't respond. Sometimes love isn't enough to fix what's broken. I drove to Jessica's again. I didn't want to be around him anymore. He had hurt me in ways I couldn't ignore, and I wasn't sure if I could ever look at him the same way again. The next day, I woke up still reeling from the conversation with Alex. I hadn't slept much, and my mind was racing with thoughts I couldn't slow down. His apology felt hollow, like a band-aid on a wound that needed stitches. I didn't know what I was supposed to do next. Should I go back home, try to salvage this relationship, or was it already too late? I had to face it. I wasn't the only one who was emotionally distant anymore. The space I was giving Alex wasn't just for me to think, but also for him to come to terms with what had happened. But I needed to understand more. I had to get to the bottom of things. Alex wasn't being honest with me, and I couldn't just keep letting things slide. I needed answers. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a text from Kyler. He had sent me a message the night before, but I hadn't responded. I had a bad feeling about this, but at this point, I was desperate for clarity. I called him. "Hey," he answered, his voice a little quieter than usual. I could tell he was still unsure of how much to say. "You said you had more to tell me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though my heart was pounding. "I need to know what's going on with Alex. I can't keep living in the dark." There was a long pause before Kyler spoke again. "Okay. Well, I didn't want to get involved, but Alex has been pretty open with me lately about how he's been feeling. About you. About the wedding." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" I asked, holding my breath. "He's been talking a lot about how he's not sure about marriage, about how everything feels rushed," Kyler continued. I didn't know how bad it was until last week when Sam started encouraging him to, you know, think about his options. He's been questioning things for a while now, but he hasn't told you, has he? I felt my chest tighten. No, he hasn't, I said quietly, my voice almost breaking. He's kept all of this from me. I've been sitting here thinking it was just wedding stress, but this is something bigger, isn't it? Kyler hesitated again, clearly uncomfortable, but then he dropped the next bombshell. There's someone else involved. A woman named Maria. She works with Alex at the company. They've been spending time together, talking outside of work. Not anything physical, but I don't know, it's been emotional for him. He hasn't exactly been open about it, but I think he's been using her as an outlet for all of his doubts. Maria. That name hit me like a ton of bricks. I remembered meeting her briefly at the company Christmas party. She was friendly, pretty, and seemed nice enough. But this was something I hadn't seen coming, Kyler went on, explaining how Alex had mentioned Maria several times to him in passing, but only in a way that seemed to suggest there was something more. I'm telling you this because you deserve to know, Kyler said. I don't want to get in the middle of things, but I can't keep seeing Alex go through this without you knowing the truth. I thanked him for being honest, though I was in complete shock. I hung up the phone, still processing everything. I had been blindsided by so much. Alex hadn't just been doubting the wedding, he had been confiding in others, including this woman, while I was left in the dark. And it wasn't just the emotional connection with Maria that hurt, it was the fact that Alex hadn't trusted me enough to share his feelings with me, to be open and honest about what was going on in his head. I texted my brother Ben to fill him in on everything I'd learned. He was angry, but he didn't want to jump to conclusions. We need to figure out what Alex is really thinking, he said. But you don't deserve to be kept in the dark anymore. That evening, I sat alone in Jessica's living room, staring at the engagement ring still on my finger. It felt like a weight I couldn't bear anymore. I had always imagined this moment, the day when I would be making wedding plans and imagining a future together with Alex. Instead, here I was, piecing together the story that Alex had been too scared to tell me himself. I made the decision then. I wasn't going to go back home yet. I needed to confront Alex. I needed to know everything. No more half-truths or omissions. Whatever was going on, I couldn't keep pretending like nothing was wrong. I called Jessica and told her that I needed to meet with Alex. I'm going to hear him out. I need to know the whole story. The next day, we arranged to meet at the cafe near his work. It felt like the only place neutral enough where we could talk. My hands were shaking as I walked into the cafe, and there he was, sitting at a corner table, looking so different from the person I'd been with for 5 years. He seemed smaller somehow, more lost. When he saw me, he didn't smile. He just looked at me like he was waiting for me to speak first. And I did. I know about Maria, I said, cutting straight to the point. I know what's been going on. And I need you to tell me everything. Alex's face went pale when I said Maria's name. It was like a punch to his gut, but I wasn't going to sugarcoat anything anymore. I needed him to understand that I wasn't playing games, and I wasn't going to sit through more lies. He took a deep breath, clearly trying to figure out how to say what I already knew. Look, Margot, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I never thought you'd find out this way. I swear, nothing physical happened with Maria, but he trailed off, as though the words he needed to say next were too heavy to speak. Go on, I said, my voice steady, but every word felt like it was coming from a place of heartbreak. He ran a hand through his hair and sighed. She and I have been working on the same project at the company, and we've talked outside of work a few times. At first, it was just work stuff, but I don't know. Over time, it felt like we were connecting. Not like how we were, but emotionally, it made me question things. He paused again, his face full of guilt. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't want you to think it was about her, or that I was choosing her over you. Then why didn't you tell me? I asked. My voice didn't shake, but I could feel the weight of it, thick in the air between us. I was scared, he admitted. I didn't know how to tell you that I was scared. I've been scared of this whole thing for a while now. My dad's mess. It's all been in my head. I don't want to turn into him. I don't want to be the guy who leaves, the guy who ruins everything. I was afraid of making a promise I couldn't keep. I sat down across from him, feeling numb. There was a part of me that wanted to sympathize, to say that I understood, that I could help him work through his fears, but I couldn't, not when he had kept so much from me. Not when he had let his own insecurities overshadow everything we had built. You've been afraid of me too, haven't you? I asked, finally voicing the thought that had been gnawing at me. You've been afraid of committing to me, of trusting me with your feelings. That's why you've been pulling away, isn't it? Alex looked at me, his eyes filled with regret. I didn't want to drag you into my mess. I was trying to keep it all inside, to protect you. But I see now, that was just selfish. I wasn't being honest with you, with myself, or with anyone. I didn't know what to say to that. I had loved this man, trusted him, and believed that we were building a life together. And yet, here he was, telling me that all of it had been clouded by his fear and doubt. I thought I was the one who didn't know where we stood, but I hadn't realized how much of that confusion was coming from him, too. I've been making excuses for you, I said quietly, almost to myself. I thought you were just stressed about the wedding, that it was just cold feet. But this is more than that. I don't know who you are anymore, Alex. I'm sorry, he whispered. I never meant to hurt you. I should have told you everything. I should have talked to you instead of bottling it all up. But I didn't, and now it's too late. It was like he was speaking the truth, but it wasn't enough. The damage had already been done. We were no longer the couple that had laughed over pizza, dreamed of a future together. The wedding we had planned, the life we had imagined, was slipping through my fingers. I can't do this anymore, I said, the words coming out clearer than I had expected. I can't keep trying to fix something that's already broken. I need to let go. Alex's eyes searched mine, but there was nothing left for him to say. I understand, he said, his voice barely a whisper. We sat there for a moment in silence. The world outside felt like it was moving on, but here we were, stuck in a place I never thought we'd be. I thought I would cry, or scream, or something dramatic, but instead, I just felt empty. This was the end, and I couldn't keep pretending it wasn't. I'm going to move out, I said, standing up. I can't stay here anymore. I need space, time to figure out what comes next. Alex nodded, his face a mix of sadness and resignation. I'll pack my things too, as soon as I can. I didn't want to stay for more awkward goodbyes or empty promises. I didn't want to hear how much he regretted everything, or how sorry he was. I had heard enough of that already. I grabbed my purse and headed for the door. As I walked out, I looked at him one last time. There were no more words left to say. I stepped out into the cool air, and for the first time in days, I took a deep breath. It wasn't the kind of relief I expected, but it was a start. I didn't know what was coming next, but I knew I had to move forward, alone. The days that followed were a blur of awkward silences, packing boxes, and trying to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. I stayed at Jessica's place for a few nights, and while I was grateful for her support, I couldn't shake the emptiness that had settled in my chest. It wasn't just the loss of Alex, it was everything that came with it. The future we had planned, the family I thought I was marrying into, the life that was suddenly no longer mine to claim. I spent my days scrolling through wedding venues, caterer lists, honeymoon packages, all the plans that had once been full of excitement, now felt like cruel reminders of what wasn't going to happen. And every time I tried to focus, my phone would buzz, and it would be another well-meaning friend or family member asking how I was doing, or worse, asking if I was okay to reschedule the wedding. The hardest part wasn't even the canceled wedding. It wasn't the wedding dress hanging in Jessica's spare bedroom, still with the tags on. It wasn't the fact that the venue wouldn't refund the deposit, or that our guest list was now a painful reminder of everything we had lost. The hardest part was the aftermath, the quiet that came after the chaos, the aloneness that now surrounded me. I had spent the last 5 years building my life around Alex, around us, and now, suddenly, there was nothing. No plans, no future, no shared memories to look forward to, just empty space. But somehow I had to move forward. I needed to. I couldn't stay stuck in this feeling of being broken. That's what I told myself every morning as I dragged myself out of bed, sometimes with little more than the hope that today would be easier than the last. I called my mom and told her what had happened, though I wasn't sure I was ready for the lecture I knew would follow. Surprisingly, she didn't give me a hard time. She just told me she was proud of me for making the tough decision, and that she was there for me. Maybe it was a low bar for parental support, but in that moment, it was enough. By the end of the week, I started looking for a new apartment. The apartment I shared with Alex felt like a tomb now. The walls that once held the promise of our future together now just held reminders of a love that hadn't been enough. I knew I needed to move out, to start fresh, but finding a new place was harder than I expected. The rental market in the city was tough, and my budget was tighter than it had been when we'd been planning the wedding together. Eventually, I found something a small one-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't perfect. It was older, with creaky floors and a tiny kitchen, but it was mine. And that's what mattered. I could start over. The first night in the apartment, I sat on the couch, curled up with beans, and for the first time in days, I felt a little bit of peace. The silence felt different here, empty, yes, but also full of possibility. A few days later, I started making more concrete decisions. I went through my phone and deleted every single photo of Alex and me. I kept some on my laptop, just in case, but I didn't need to look at them every time I opened my phone. I called the wedding planner to officially cancel everything. They were sympathetic, but their condolences didn't help much. The photographer sent me an email offering to transfer the deposit to another event down the line. I was grateful for the thought, but the idea of planning another wedding anytime soon felt like a joke. The florist refunded half the payment, which helped ease some of the financial sting, but there was no amount of money that could heal the emotional damage. The ring sat in its box, untouched. Alex had told me I could keep it or sell it, that it wasn't his place to take it back. Part of me wanted to sell it, to get rid of the last thing that felt like a symbol of the broken future, but another part of me couldn't bring myself to part with it. It wasn't the ring that mattered, it was what it represented, and right now, I wasn't ready to let go of that. Not yet. Social media became its own battlefield. I dreaded posting anything, knowing the questions would flood in. I waited 2 weeks before changing my relationship status. The moment I did, my notifications exploded, people asking what happened, offering support, and some, honestly, just curious. The most exhausting part was the subtle judgment in people's comments. "I never thought you two were a good match," one person wrote. Another sent a message saying, "Everything happens for a reason. You'll find someone who appreciates you." I had to mute my notifications. The constant reminder of the breakup, the pity, and the unsolicited advice, it was too much. The day I changed my status, I posted a single picture of my new apartment, keys in hand, with a simple caption, "New beginnings." It didn't get nearly as many likes as the engagement announcement had, but it felt more genuine, like I was reclaiming something that was mine. I didn't hear from Alex much after that. He sent a couple of texts asking how I was doing, but I never responded right away. When he reached out about returning some of my things, I agreed, but I set up a time to meet in a public place. I wasn't ready to face him in private, not yet. The first time we met to exchange keys and some of my belongings, there was this strange, almost surreal quality to the whole thing. We were like strangers meeting for the first time. He looked the same, but different, like a man who had just realized how much he had lost. "I'm sorry, Margot," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "I wish I could undo everything." "I know," I replied quietly, "but you can't." We stood there for a moment, neither of us knowing what to say, and then, like a final seal on everything, I handed him the keys and walked away. I didn't look back, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something to change. I felt like I was finally moving forward. It's been a couple of months since everything with Alex ended, and while things aren't perfect, they're getting better. The last few weeks have been a mix of small victories and hard lessons. There are days when I feel like I'm finally starting to breathe again, and others when I catch myself staring at the ceiling, wondering if I made the right choice. I've settled into my new apartment, and it feels more like mine with each passing day. The creaky floors and small kitchen aren't so bad now that I've added a few plants and some cozy touches. I've even started baking again, something I hadn't done in years. It feels good to reclaim parts of myself I thought I'd lost along the way. I've kept in touch with Jessica, and she's been a constant source of support. She still reminds me to take it one day at a time, especially when I get caught up in my head, thinking about what I lost. My brother Ben has been amazing too, checking in regularly and offering his perspective on everything. He's the one who convinced me to go out with him one Saturday to a little bookstore cafe I love. We didn't talk much about the breakup, just enjoyed the quiet and the comfort of being in each other's company. Sometimes, that's all I need, just to be with people who love me, without any expectation of healing on their timeline. I've also started therapy. I wasn't sure about it at first, but It's been helpful to have a space where I can talk about everything: how much I compromised in my relationship, how I ignored the red flags. The therapist keeps pushing me to confront the things I buried deep down, to really unpack why I allowed myself to stay in a relationship where I wasn't being fully seen. As for Alex, I haven't heard from him much, just a few texts about the apartment and some mutual friends. The ring is still in my drawer, untouched. Part of me wonders if I'll ever really be able to let it go. But for now, I'm not thinking about him as much as I thought I would. I've realized that letting go of someone doesn't mean forgetting the good parts of them. It means allowing myself the space to heal and rebuild. The road ahead is still unclear, but I'm beginning to feel like I can handle whatever comes next. For the first time in a long while, I'm focused on my own future, and that feels like a step in the right direction.